All right, guys. Welcome back to Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined as usual, as of late, by none other than Matt Karoly. You know him from Rise Up Reader. And today's episode, we are going to be talking about, of course, the Falcons' most recent loss against the New Orleans Saints. We'll also be talking about their upcoming matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, as well as answering your mailbag questions throughout and later on in the show. So, welcome back. Hope you had a happy holiday, Matt. We can, get the chit chat out of the way at first if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, like I said on last week's show, the mac and cheese that I was looking forward to so much from my grandmother lived up to the hype. So, had a bunch of that, and unfortunately, the football, um, left me with a sour taste in my mouth that night. Stayed up pretty late thinking about that game and what happened with that, and we'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, how was your Thanksgiving, Aaron? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, man. Grandma never lets you down.
No, she does not.
So yeah, I had a good time. It was a fun week. Got to see some family that I hadn't seen in a while, and get to see them like pretty much once a year.
Yeah.
Right around this time of year. So it's always fun catching up with those people. And of course, the Falcons got to do what they got to do to leave a great day on a very bitter note. So
yeah.
Let's jump into it. As we usually do, we talk about roster moves, but I understand, Matt, there are no roster moves to talk about this week. But Matt, you have a specific topic that is roster related that you want to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, with the Falcons now at 4-7, obviously, and a lot's going to have to go right for them to sniff the postseason this year. The one roster decision I think on my mind, and I think on a lot of fans' minds, I don't know if there's a mailbag question about it, but Deion Jones didn't suit up again in the New Orleans game, and Michelle Tafoya kind of spoke on it a little bit pregame that Jones was still feeling some pain in his foot. So, kind of with that all being said, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts. Is there anything that would be worthwhile to even activate him at this point, or something you want to see for these last couple games just out of him, or at this point, because of the season being what it is, would you want to shut him down?
No to your last question. I want to see Deion Jones play. I want to see if he can basically save this defense from being terrible. I want to see how good he is. Like he's the only thing that gives me any hope that our defense is going to do anything over this last month plus. So I would like to see him play. Now, if the Falcons have to sort of if he only plays 3 games as opposed to 5 games or whatnot, then so be it. But at this point, to me, like, the talk of shutting down Deion Jones or Julio Jones or who, like, I don't really get that. Just play,
Yeah. And I mean, you made a great point of seeing how great he can be because, my one takeaway from the one game that he did play in that Philly opener, I thought he showed tremendous strides in the run game. And that's always been my knock. I think it's been a little bit of your knock on him is can he become this complete linebacker that we expect out of him? And he certainly showed a lot of it in that first game. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think even though the season is pretty much kaput as far as the playoffs go, seeing his development and seeing where he's at, and like you said, he's the one, last great white hope for this defense to do some damage or to be something or to show kind of where they're at as far as we talk about. We've had questions saying, when Deion comes back, where is this defense? Where does this go to? I mean, it's hard to say that when you don't see him. So I think that would be the reason to have him back is just to see, is this a middle tier defense? And then obviously then you would know kind of, we need to add stuff to the D-line. We need to see when Keanu's back. We need to see when Ricardo's back and all the guys working in unison, then truly where they're at. But yeah, I'm with you too. I think there is a reason and a meaning behind suiting him up, and hopefully the pain that Michelle did speak of kind of isn't anything lingering because obviously the worst thing you can do is have him come back and he just re-aggravates it, and then you're questioning 2019 and beyond.
Fair enough. So let's talk about the Saints game that we all were hopeful that Deion Jones would come back for, and he did not. And that was unfortunate because I think the Falcons could have definitely used the pick six in this game to just balance out all the turnovers that they had on from offense or something. So, Matt, what were your thoughts watching the game Thursday night?
So we knew this game was going to be an uphill battle to start with. I mean, when you're playing arguably the best team in football in their building on a short week, it was going to be a tall task. But for me, the most frustrating aspect was, they beat themselves in this game more than I think the Saints beat them. I mean, the Saints, you got to give them credit for certain things that they did. But when you have the 3 red zone fumbles that you had, look, the scary part for me is in these last 3 weeks, in this 3-game losing streak, this team has shown the same sort of, signs and symptoms that they showed in 2017, whereas, the defense is failing to get off the field. Every week now they're giving up a 7-8 minute drive and keeping that offense, on the sidelines, failing to get in a rhythm because of that. And then, from an offensive standpoint, when they are on the field, the execution issues now and the untimely turnovers, that was, the major undoing for them last year. And I know people are going to continue now to want to point back to Steve Sarkisian and the play calling, but, this team is still moving the ball down the field. I mean, in the Saints game, no less, their average offensive possession was 7 plays for 37 yards. And that's been in line with their average this year, according to Football Outsiders. I mean, they average 6.5 plays per drive, which was second in the league coming into that game. And they averaged 41 yards per drive. So that was close to, if not exceeded their averages in those 2 numbers. So they're not having any trouble moving the ball and making plays. It's just when they get down to the red zone, again, they're doing stupid stuff like the fumbles, and they're not making the right reads. Ryan's failing to make a couple of reads at times, and guys are dropping passes. So that's my biggest concern, and that's a concern that's not going to go away when you have the guys that come off of IR. I mean, you're still going to have that issue. So for me, they have to rectify that somehow, and I don't know what it is necessarily. I can't really place my finger on it, whether it's just they're growing frustrated and they're not focusing. But for me, I mean, that's my biggest takeaway is we're seeing the same signs from the 2017 team as far as the execution issues, and then obviously the defense not getting off the field and putting the offense behind the 8 ball. So yeah, for me, those were my major takeaways from the New Orleans game.
Yeah, for me, in addition to those, I've said it 1,000 times. I'll probably keep saying it 1,000 more. If they get off, this team is entirely relying on their offense. And when their offense gets off to slow starts, it's just they're just not going to win games that way because their defense can't hang for 4 quarters. And, unfortunately, this offense hasn't been showing the ability to basically be able to drop 21 points, in the second quarter, in the third quarter, or whatever. They have at various times in the past.
Not to cut you off, but that kind of brings up another point. As far as Dan Quinn, I understand the logic behind deferring to start a game. You want to get that 2-for-1 at the end of the half. But what you just said, I mean, I totally agree with it. It's predicated on this team getting off to a fast start, the offense getting off to a fast start. If you're putting your offense out there after, a 4 or 5 minute drive the defense gives up for a touchdown, that could have something to do with it too. I mean, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage right from the start. And then when you compound it with the turnovers, obviously it makes it worse. But why? I mean, that whole philosophy needs to change, in my opinion, at least this year with this team until you feel more comfortable with the defense.
I get it most weeks. I think it's generally a better philosophy most weeks. But this past week against the Saints, it just didn't make as much sense. Just because you knew the Saints were going to be able to drop 30 with ease on this team. You just knew that was going to happen. It was just okay, the question was, are we only going to hold the Saints to 30, or are we going to hold them to 40, or are we going to give up 50? So, to defer in this game, it's just like, yeah, man, just in this particular game, like most other games, when you're like this week against Baltimore, if they defer, I don't really have an issue with that.
I guess it's just, I think it puts just a little added pressure when when you're stepping onto the field, the offense is going to be down 7-0 right from the start in a hostile environment. So for me, I think it makes some sense maybe at home doing that philosophy, but when you're on the road like this, why not your strength is your offense. Why not put them on the field first and hopefully they get off to the fast start that's necessary for them to get a win.
Yeah, no, I think definitely in terms of doing it on the road makes a lot more sense. And again, certainly this past week against this specific Saints team, like again, no one thought Cleveland was going to tear up the Falcons, so I can get it. But against the Saints, it just didn't make any sense to me. But
yeah,
like that's what they like, And here's the thing, Dan Quinn's not perfect, so he'll learn, or hopefully he learns from it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully we don't have to wait till 2019 for him to learn from it, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Do you have a brother of the week? And this comes from our good buddy Evan Birchfield, which is, for those of you that are new to the show, it is the person who did the most for the team but won't necessarily get the headlines.
So I have an answer A and an answer B if you're not happy with answer A, because my answer A, I want to say Matt Ryan for this one, just from the simple standpoint that, during the broadcast and then even after the broadcast, I just think the criticism of him was tremendously one-sided and biased. And I'm not sure exactly what Rodney Harrison has against Matt Ryan, but it was clear watching the game that it was something. When I went back and rewatched it, because I wanted to see if there was some fairness to the criticism. And for me, other than, perhaps that it was the second possession where Matt Ryan was kind of running around with his chick like a chicken with his head cut off, I thought he could have at least mitigated that problem and just, thrown it out of the back of the end zone. Or, even Matt Waldman posted a video showing that maybe he had Ridley on that flat route crossing the face of Lattimore. But I mean, we can probably argue and nitpick stuff like that all game. But other than that, and then the fourth down conversion, I thought Matt played a hell of a game. I thought it was pretty clean. I thought he made some great throws. I mean, that one to Calvin that he dropped into a bucket that Calvin, didn't come down with. I mean, that could have been huge if he comes down with that, because that was drive 3 of the game. I just think with all the circumstances and, with the offensive line having arguably the worst game, and there were some worse ones earlier in the season. So for this to be the worst one, I mean, that kind of puts that into perspective. I thought, he gave the team a shot to win, but unfortunately with the turnovers and stuff and just, the miscues, there wasn't, much more he could do, I thought, in my opinion. So that's why I would go with him, honestly, because I think he's going to, you talked about it, quarterbacks get too much of the blame for losses. And that's why I, kind of want to just choose him this week, because I don't think he deserves it. But, just to throw my answer B, I thought Jack Crawford again had a great game, very disruptive against the run, which isn't something you kind of expect from him. You expect him to be the guy getting after the quarterback, but he was disruptive in both areas, and he continues to have a career year and shows why he deserves to be back with the team in 2019.
All fair. Like, I was one of those people that live did not think Matt Ryan played well. Then rewatching the game, I think, came to the realization that it was probably one of the better games he had all year. If I was picking a person, I'd go with my man Mohamed Sanu. I thought he had a pretty solid game. It was one of the better games.
Whoa! Sound the alarms.
He had a good start to the game. It sort of faded as the game wore on, but pretty much everybody faded as the game wore on. Yeah. So I can't hold him too much accountable for that. But it looked like he was poised for a big game. Going up against like P.J. Williams and whoever the Saints slot corner was in that game. So I think he was one of the standout receivers. And unlike Calvin Ridley and unlike Julio Jones, he did not have a egregious turnover in the red zone as he was about to score. So he certainly deserves, some credit for, unlike, what was it, Dallas game or what game it was where he fumbled unnecessarily. He was not
the
the guy
Cleveland game. Yeah.
the Cleveland. Okay. Yeah. So, he did not do that this week. So, kudos to you, Mohamed Sanu.
Man, I'm gonna frame this moment. Did not expect that answer, especially after today's conversations a little bit on Twitter too. But
look, I
applaud you giving the guy his due when he deserves
it. I don't hate him. I just don't think he should be a Falcon next year. But
yeah, we know.
Anyway, any other thoughts on the Saints game before we move on to the Ravens game?
Nah, I think I said my piece. I mean, again, the miscues, very frustrating.
So we got another week where we're just basically twiddling our thumbs, hoping that Deion Jones plays, and I think this could be critical to the Falcons' success this week, just because I think the big question, at least defensively, I think the offensive questions are the same questions we've had, all year long. It's the same stuff. But defensively, it's going to be, now with Lamar Jackson playing this week, and this goes to a question by Evan Birchfield, which is how do the Falcons stop Lamar Jackson? I think you have two main strategies which you can deploy against this Ravens offense with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. You can decide to play primarily zone coverage and have multiple defenders trying to keep their eyes on the quarterback. This is basically the strategy the Falcons employed in week 2 against Cam Newton, with a couple of man coverage plays sprinkled in there. And, that's a pretty traditional strategy when it comes to mobile quarterbacks and makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. I think the other strategy, in particular to this Ravens team, just because Lamar Jackson isn't necessarily, as experienced as, someone like a Cam Newton is, and so could still be prone to missing reads and whatnot. And because the Ravens don't have, dynamic receivers, with the exception of maybe John Brown, who would be, is potentially a tough matchup for the Falcons in the slot. I think you can play a lot of man coverage and play a lot of cover one and rush 4 guys and have your linebacker be a spy and just go man up these receivers and tight ends. And I think with the Falcons players on the back end, I think that could be a successful strategy. But it depends heavily on whether or not you can spy Jackson successfully. And I think Deion Jones is the only guy that I really trust. And that's funny because last season when Deion Jones was asked to spy Tyrod Taylor, he kind of was terrible at it. And the Falcons make a switch halfway through the game to ask Keanu Neal to do it. And Neal was able to sort of keep Taylor somewhat in check after that point. But, even if I think Deion Jones is going to have a repeat performance of that Buffalo game, I still trust him 100 times more than I trust Duke Riley in that role. And because the Falcons, continue to play Duke Riley in that role and haven't turned the keys fully over to Foye Olakun, who I think is plausible could do it. I think it's basically all hinging on Deion Jones. But all that being said, even if Deion Jones does come back this week, my expectation is the Falcons will go the traditional route and play a lot of more zone. And I will, bang my head into the desk and wonder why am I forced to go through this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think this is a huge Deion Jones game. The Ravens, it's pretty crazy how, over the bye week, I'm sure they had this installed for a while, and it's just making it seem like they just flipped a switch. But, I was reading an article on theringer.com that I think it was, forget his first name, but Kelly.
Kelly.
Yeah. He had written kind of detailing that first game against the Bengals that Jackson was inserted to the lineup, how their philosophy took a complete 180. Heading into the week with Joe Flacco at quarterback, they threw the ball more than any other team per game, and they ran play action like 22% of the time. And since Jackson took over, I mean, obviously we've seen it's been they've ran the ball more than any other team, and the play action went from like 22% to 45%. So I don't know how much. I mean, now they have 2 weeks of this, but it's going to be a completely different game plan for them. They have to deal with all this zone read stuff now, which they did get a little bit of it against Dak Prescott in Dallas. So hopefully that helps. But
didn't handle it well. So I mean, good. I'm glad they got the practice.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, like most things this year, it's been a disaster. But I mean, this is a huge sideline to sideline game because they're going to be tested the whole length of the field. And Deion Jones, being the rangy linebacker that he is, I mean, there isn't a better game for him to show out in that role than this one. This matchup is scary. I tweeted, before coming on the show, I was looking at the time of possession battle that the Ravens have had in their last 2 games. And they had 38 minutes to 21 minutes against the Bengals. And then they had 34 minutes to 25 minutes against the Raiders last week. And that just screams bad news for the Falcons and consequently their offense. If they can't stop the run and force Lamar into some third and mediums or third and longs and force him to beat him with their arm, it's going to be a long day. And, this Gus Edwards now that the rookie from Rutgers that they've inserted next to him in the backfield, I mean, he's that type of downhill back that can really punish them inside. So, yeah, for me, it comes down to they got to stop the run and sell out for the run. And then hopefully, like you said, they don't have a lot of dynamic receivers on the outside that are going to scare you. So, I'm comfortable with, any sort of man that they might play in this game. But yeah, I mean, if they don't stop the run, it's going to be a long day, and it's going to be more of the same that we've seen the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, look, we know the best Falcons run defense is their offense, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is if they can get off to a fast start and force the Ravens to throw the football, and basically abandon the run, in the second or third quarter or whatever it is, that's going to be the recipe for success. And going up against this Ravens offense, this is the toughest offense that we've faced the last 3 weeks. And we haven't necessarily seen great offensive performance for the Falcons those last 3 weeks. But, I think the Ravens have some things that the Falcons can exploit. I think they can sort of attack certain elements of their secondary. I think they can maybe use Tevin Coleman and try to get his speed out there in space against some of their linebackers. But, as it often does, it starts up front. If the offensive line can pass protect, which has been a problem for this season, then I think things can click for the Falcons. But if they can't, then, it's going to be tough sledding for the Falcons. I don't expect the running game to be a big part of it, and that's why I think it's even more paramount that the offensive line can hold up, because I do think this is potentially going to be a game where Matt Ryan's going to have to drop back to throw 40, 50 times if the Falcons are going to find a way to win it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to say, I mean, guys like Michael Pierce and Brandon Williams up front for the Ravens, those guys are brick walls. And, my biggest worry is you're going to see the same thing we saw on Thursday with Saints just made the Falcons one-dimensional and then they pin their ears back. And that's usually the formula for success going up against this offense. So, my prayer is that we get a performance like we saw against Washington where the offensive line takes their performance last week personally and is like, yeah, we need to correct some stuff. And, all these rumors of Dan Quinn potentially making offensive line changes, hopefully that rattles the cage of Ben Garland and Wes Schweitzer and Ryan Schrader and those guys that have been struggling. And because, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is another trench game, and the trench games don't usually favor well for the Falcons. So, yeah, I'm worried about them making them one-dimensional, and then at that point, I mean, they got some edge guys that they go about 2-3 deep there. So that's my biggest concern as far as the Falcons' offense. So yeah, they got to get out to a fast start, and then, like you said, hopefully that changes the Ravens' offensive philosophy. But again, if the two lines don't play well, I don't like the Falcons' chances, unfortunately, in this one.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. As we've said a number of times, the Falcons are more than capable of putting, forth that A or B plus level performance, which is going to get them the W. We just haven't seen it in a while. We saw it against Washington, haven't seen it since. And, they've sort of been throwing out, C and arguably maybe some D level performances the last 3 weeks. And you've obviously seen the results. And so they're more than capable of doing it. We know that this team typically has been better at home this season. It's sort of kind of evening out now these last couple of games, but it is one of those things where it does feel like if they're going to get a spark back, I mean, how many more games can we basically continue to say this without being?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, that might be their biggest issue is consistency. And that's something the coaching staff has to answer for because, like you said, we have seen performances this year where they've peaked and they played at an A level, and you can't really blame some of the injuries anymore on something like that when you've seen the guys out there that they have to work with play well or do their part to the point where, as a collective unit, they're getting the job done and looking good. So, I don't know what they can do differently. I mean, again, I talked about them being frustrated with the way this season has been, and does that have something to do with the consistency issues? But I think we've seen it in years prior too with this bunch. So, I mean, that's the main thing that Dan Quinn has to really, as a head coach, take upon himself and fix.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm sort of maybe naively hoping that Deion Jones comes back because I feel like he's the energy boost, the presence, the leadership, or whatever the case may be. He might not even be any of those things, but I have sort of built him up to be those things in my mind because
I think you're right too. The players have recently spoken about it. I mean, I think someone, I don't remember who it was, but they basically said he's the Matt Ryan of that defense. Which when I saw that, I was like, "Whew, that's some high praise." I mean, you're talking about a guy that's been there 2+ seasons compared to a guy that's been there 11+ seasons. So if they're saying those things about Deion, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he can be that spark.
Yeah. So like again, I hope he is. I
Yeah.
guess what I'm saying is not that he isn't capable of being it. It's just like even if you like the defense just might be so bad that even if you throw that out there, it doesn't really change anything. They're still, giving up 28 plus points a game or whatever the case, or, it goes from 28 to 27 or like, oh my God, Deion Jones did such a great job in improving defense or something like that. So that's what I'm saying. Like, but like this, I'm just like, he is sort of like the last best hope for something to happen, something, just to shake up the status quo. And so, like, I hope this week is the week that he returns because obviously there are some on-field matchups that I think he could definitely play a huge part of. But also just, getting this team something that can sort of just come in because it felt like if they were going to do it on their own, it would have happened in certainly against Dallas. I think.
Yeah, I mean that
coming
Cleveland
out
game
flat,
was a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, coming out flat against New Orleans is like not acceptable, but I get it. It's a short week. It's a hostile environment. It's a team that's, better than you, and so like I get it. But the Dallas game, I think really, coming off of that Cleveland game, like they should have figured it out at home against Dallas. They didn't, and so now it's like okay, they've got a couple of days off from the Thursday night game on Thanksgiving. They're at home against Baltimore. They should figure it out, right? But last time we had this opportunity, they didn't. So it's like, is this going to be the week? And so, and then I don't know. Probably 2 weeks from now, I'm like, oh, they're playing Arizona. They're bad. They're at home. They're going to figure it out. And then of course they're going to. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's like,
yeah. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But yeah.
It just at a certain point, you just can't keep deluding yourself that they're going to figure it out. So this is kind of it for me at least.
Yeah.
If they do it later on, then they do it. But like, I'm just not going to really expect it at this point.
Like the late great Denny Green said, they are who they thought they were. So,
absolutely. Do you have a prediction for this game?
Yeah, I think the Ravens win this one. Ravens have only been giving up 18 points per game through 11 games, and that's pretty impressive with today's NFL. At least this year, being so offensively driven, we still have a couple good defenses out there, and I think the Ravens are one of them. And like I was saying earlier about this matchup with their rushing attack, controlling the football, I think they are going to be able to do that. So I'm kind of in the 24-16 ballpark. Unfortunately, the offense is going to have another, low scoring effort, but I think, again, a lot of that's going to have to do with playing keep away against them and, this defense being pretty good and making them one-dimensional and getting after Matt Ryan a little bit maybe.
Yeah, I've been curious because the Ravens play the Falcons this week, and they go on the road against the Chiefs next week. So we'll get to see sort of how legit this Ravens defense is. They're number one both in scoring and in yards allowed this season. So for me, like on paper, this should be a Ravens win. But when we've seen some of these paper predictions, that it's been the opposite of what you would think, particularly these last couple of games. So I'm still going to pick the Ravens to win, but like it wouldn't, I wouldn't be shocked if the Falcons figure it out because I think they can, but at the same time, I'm not going to hold my breath anymore. Like as I said,
it is interesting that the ESPN's Football Power Index has them winning, their favor like 56% to 44% now. That hasn't been accurate for most of the year that I've been looking at that. So, but I thought that was interesting.
I think I think we're hoping, that Lamar Jackson is sort of the typical rookie on the road, has those.
That's true. First road start.
Yeah, and throwing picks and whatnot. So, again, there is a formula, there is a pathway to success for the Falcons this week to beat the Ravens. But again, at this point, I'll believe it when I see it.
Right, and he hasn't taken care of the ball that well. I think he's thrown 3 or 4 interceptions in the 2 games. So again, they force him to make throws and not as many plays with his legs. Then, like you said, there's a formula. There's a path to victory.
Yeah. All right, we got some more mailbag questions to answer on today's show. The first 2 come from Slim Gator at South Life Gold and Brian, your homeboy Brian, on Twitter. They're similar questions. Slim Gator asks, I feel like the Falcons offense has been better this year, but not because of anything Sark has changed, but the players adjusting. I think Sark will be okay, but we'll keep the offense from reaching its full potential. I would like to go after Gary Kubiak. Thoughts? And Brian asks, what is your guys' opinions on the coaching staff performance this season? Many of the fans have turned on Dan Quinn and say he doesn't know what he's doing. I think Dan Quinn is the perfect coach for this team. I think Sark and Manuel are fine. What's your take?
So question 1, I totally agree. I don't think, at least I haven't seen much from a play calling standpoint to say that Sark has necessarily done a lot of things differently. I just thought, patience was what it was going to take and just more comfortability with the personnel and knowing how to feature them. And I think that's what we've seen, at least, or what we saw when they were flying high in weeks 2 through 9. So for me, I've always been in support of just staying patient with Sark and knowing that once he figures out how to deploy all these assets on the offense, they'll be just fine. As far as Kubiak, I mean, I think people are overrating him. He's a great play caller. But I still think you're going to deal with some of the same issues as far as him coming in there and having to learn how to feature some of these guys. He would be the guy, obviously, that I'd want if Sarkisian took a college coaching job or whatever, or got lured away by an NFL team. He would be the first name at the top of the list, absolutely, because it's just the fit. It would be a perfect fit as far as the scheme. He'd run the same stuff. But I still think if they try to fire Sark and think Kubiak's going to just come in there and wave his wand over the team and they're just going to, average 30-plus points like they did with Kyle Shanahan, I think people are going to be mistaken on that. And then the second question, as far as, the rest of the coaching staff, look, I've had good things. I've had some negative things to say about Dan Quinn and Marquand Manuel, but I think I kind of feel like Marquand Manuel is a little bit of a puppet, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just think he's running Dan Quinn's scheme. Now, Dan Quinn's given him, free reign for the most part, at least as far as what I know. But I do think when fans try to criticize the scheme and some of the game planning, I think a lot of that has to be directed more towards Dan Quinn because, again, he's brought a very vanilla scheme from his days in Seattle to Atlanta. He's not going to change that up a lot. That scheme requires, the elite athletes to be out on the field. You saw all the talent that they had in Seattle. They had Pro Bowlers on every level. When you have the heart and soul right up the middle of your defense being out, you're going to see struggles with this defense. I mean, it's not like the offense doesn't know what to attack with it, but when you have the elite athletes out there and the Pro Bowl caliber players, that's going to win out more times than not, no matter what the scheme is. So, again, I'm totally on board with Dan Quinn. And Quinn I trust. I think he's a great talent evaluator. I think he's a great motivator, a great recruiter. He's a player's coach. I want to see this team all together healthy. I want to see him hopefully address the D-line and obviously the offensive line then too, but the D-line is that last missing piece. And I think it's the most critical piece of this defense because he's a guy that just likes to get after it with 4 guys. And he can't do that with some of the guys he has up front. I mean, he has to manufacture rushes and bring 5-6 guys. So again, I'm all on board with Dan Quinn still and this staff. And I want to see what they do going forward in 2019 when they're all healthy and have another offseason to add talent.
Yeah. To the first question from Slim Gator, I get it. I think Sark has done a better job. I think conceptually the offense has been a lot more sophisticated this season than it was last year. So I think he's shown growth in that regard. And I think that's been a part, not necessarily the reason, but a part of why the Falcons offense has improved from last year to this year. I get the Kubiak thing. I certainly would have been much more supportive of this take, 12 months ago, because at that time it seemed like Sark's lack of experience was really holding them back. And, whether I think Kubiak is dramatically an improvement over Sark, it did seem like having a more experienced offensive coordinator at this level would have paid dividends for the Falcons offense. But so far, I think Sark has sort of, quashed that, this season. So as far as replacing Sark at this point in time, it's not necessarily something that I have a particularly strong opinion on today as I did maybe a year ago. As for, the other coaches, Dan Quinn's not perfect. For me, at least, it's been funny because it's like when, a couple of years ago, people act like he was like this genius guru, walked on water, was like this perfect coach. And it was just like, yeah, I would get in trouble because I would say things like, I don't think he's that much better than Mike Smith as a coach. And people are like, what? You're crazy. You're smoking crack or whatever. And it's like, oh, I mean, he's better, but it's not like it's night and day different or anything like that. I just think Dan Quinn knows what he wants and goes out and gets it. So, again, it's not. I don't say that to disparage Dan Quinn or anything. I just think he is what he is, and he does a good job for the most part. And most of my issues with Dan Quinn are more nitpicky stuff. The effusive positivity, is grating for someone who's as negative as I am, but it works. As far as Sark, I said my piece on Sark. Again, I'm kind of with you on Marco Emmanuel. I feel like he gets a lot of grief for stuff that's not necessarily in his control. I certainly think some of the decisions that he makes during games are questionable, that you could certainly question, but I think like it is with most play callers, it's really just nitpicking. It's 3 to 5 plays a game for the most part that are things that you hate, but then the other 55 to 60 plays are just perfectly fine. I think with Manuel, I think he does certain things that I like. I don't think he's been able to do all of those things as consistently as I would like to see him do. But I think injuries have played a part in that. Like, I think he does a pretty decent job of disguising blitzes. Unfortunately, the Falcons scheme isn't necessarily a blitz-happy scheme, so that ability is kind of wasted a little bit. But I think he's done a pretty effective job at times. There's been some blitzes where I'm like, that was weird, and why did you do that? But those are, again, outweighed by the number of times where I think he's dialed up some pretty smart and creative blitzes and whatnot. So, as far as the things that he does, that he brings to the table, I think it's more good than bad, but again, he's not perfect. We're not dealing with, Wade Phillips or I don't know who's a defensive guru that everybody agrees is a great defensive coach. Bill Belichick or something. Like, he's not that dude, but like, he doesn't have to be.
Yeah, no. I can't. I mean, Mike Pettin's one that I don't know why that comes to mind right now, but
that was the name I was thinking of, but I was like, I didn't want to say it.
Yeah.
So like, I think the coaching is fine. I think obviously the team has not played up to their abilities the last 3 weeks, and certainly you can question, the coaching.
That's
and
your
the
biggest thing right now. I think you can say negatively about the coaching staff is, Dan Quinn's one of his main message coming here was that every game is treated like a championship, and when you have efforts that you've had the last couple of weeks, that does fall on the coaching staff, and that would be my biggest negative to say about them. But as far as what they do outside of that, again, you can nitpick a couple other things, but for me, I'm a huge supporter of this coaching staff. I love what the energy and the juice and stuff, and again, the recruiting aspect and seeing the players vibing with them. I mean, I think that's so cool, and I think when they were riding high, everyone was loving that sort of stuff. But because they've come on hard times a little bit, and again, a lot of that, especially on the defensive side, the injuries play a huge part in that. I think people need to remember that. Remember that. Remember the good times, because again, I believe they'll be back. When they get the guys healthy and have another off season again. Of hitting on the draft and making smart free agent decisions.
Yeah. I think the injuries are a significant factor on the downturn of the season. I certainly think the team is capable of playing better given the injuries than they have in some of these games. No doubt about that. So I get when people say, like, the injuries are an excuse and blah, blah, blah. Like, I get that to a certain extent. Like, this team should be better than what they are, even with those injuries.
Because they're the coaches on the field, too. I mean, that's what people sometimes miss. I mean, they're an extension of the coaching staff. And when you pull those guys off, you can talk next man up, but that stuff like that's tough to replace. Not everyone can do that type of intangible stuff.
Yeah. And I guess for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like everything's on the offense. And I guess this is sort of where, like, I think Sark is doing a good job, but I'm not so ready to declare Sark like, everything's hunky-dory with Sark. Like, to me, like, this game is going to be an interesting one. This is going to be probably the last litmus test for me, at least, because this is the best defense that they're going to face. And my one big question about Sark that is still lingering is how does he handle playoff caliber defenses? And based off of last year and the limited opportunities like we've had against Philadelphia this year, it hasn't necessarily gone in his favor. And so if this offense can come out against this Ravens team and actually look pretty good, that is, at least as far as I'm concerned, probably, I don't want to make too much of a sweeping judgment off of one game, but it is one of those things where it's like, okay, now I can be a little bit more confident that Sark is going to be able to take care of business. Because I think kind of their problem is that so much of their season hinges on their offense being able to carry the team. And unfortunately, no offense is really that capable. Certainly not our offense has been really capable of just doing that for 16 games. And I think that's been a reason why they sort of seemingly hit a wall after that Redskins game. And and are trying to figure it out, and we'll see if they do. But
again,
this happens.
They left at least 13 points out there on Thursday against the Saints, and they're not the best defense in the league, but the last couple of weeks they've shown that they can make plays, and you're looking at a scenario where they hung 30 on them, or could have hung 30 on them, and that wasn't on Sark. That was on the miscues. So for me, I don't know what it's going to take to reverse that fortune. Again, that's the thing I can't place my finger on. Is it just luck, bad luck again, creeping up? But Sark's been putting them in positions. The players now just need to get back to weeks 2 through 9 where they were actually executing and taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah.
I don't want to sound like I'm blaming Sark for the offensive downturn. I think the problem is, like, we've played 11 games, and he's probably called 7 good ones, which is a decent percentage, right?
Yeah.
Or let's not say he called 7 good ones. The offense has produced in 7 of them, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a pretty decent percentage. Over 16 games, that's probably, I don't know, like 10 or 11 games, which is what you would expect. What we would think is this offense is more than capable of winning 10 or 11 games. And so I think that's kind of the problem, is like when you don't have anything other than that, your team is kind of screwed. And when the defense is as bad as it is, even in those 7 games, we've lost 3 of those. So it's one of those things where, like, you just, if you over the course of a 16-game season, if you can only reliably get 10 or 11 of those games, but you're going to lose half of them because your defense is terrible, then you're basically looking at like a 5 or 6 win season type of thing. And so that's kind of, to me, what's holding the Falcons back. I don't blame that on Sark. I just think, like,
that's the thing with this conversation. It's like, yeah, we're asking so much of Sark, but you're ignoring the bigger problem, and the bigger problem is that defense. And again, it's tough to judge them in certain aspects because of the injuries, but that's for me, just the fact that the fans will want to focus the attention on that fact, because you're not wrong. I mean, he has to shoulder this burden now, but to say that he has to go, or he's the problem, he's holding this team back, that's not the case because of the stuff that you said. I mean, why does he have to shoulder this burden? It's because of the other side of the ball, and maybe the offensive line now too deserves consideration in the personnel up front there. But so for me, I don't like this conversation just because of the fact that, again, it shouldn't all have to fall on Sark. Sark's doing 7 of 11. I'll take that as far as good games that the offense has produced. Because again, it's tough to be on 11 of 11 in this league.
No, if it sounds like I'm being critical, I don't mean it. I'm just trying to explain to folks who are like the people that are out there saying, like, the coaches are ruining this for us. And I'm like, the reason why the Falcons season is tanking is because they are, basically a one-dimensional team. And unfortunately, this team is not good enough in that one dimension to basically overshadow the fact that the other dimension of the team, the defense, is just downright terrible. And that's not a fault of Sark. That's just the way it is. And so when people are like, this coaching staff is the problem and we need to start firing folks, it's just like, I don't think it is. I think the reasons why the defense is terrible, like, I don't think the defense would be good if they were healthy, but I think they would certainly be average.
Right.
And we would be talking about, 7 out of 11 games where the offense performs, we'd be like 6-1 in those games as opposed to 4-3 or whatever the case may be. And then maybe in those 4 games where the Falcons offense doesn't perform, maybe the defense would be able to win us one of those games. And so we'd be sitting here at, like a 7-4 record or an 8-3 record instead of this 4-7 record. So for me, it's a long way of explaining it, but I think when people want to blame the coaching staff, I don't think that's really the issue. I think it's partially injuries. I do think, as of late, the fact that we've gotten 3 bad performances in a row makes it seem like the coaches are a bigger issue. But I think, hopefully over the course of a 16-game season, we'll look at those 3 games in addition to that week 1 game against Philadelphia and be like, oh, those were the 4 out of the 5 or 6 poor performances that they had over the course of a 16-game season, but it's not necessarily defining their season.
Right. And that's why, for me, when all these injuries were happening, fans were saying, oh, they got to do something. They got to go out and fill these holes and stuff. And, it just doesn't work that way. And sometimes you just got to throw up your hands and shrug and be like, with the hard cap the way it is, when you lose this many guys, key guys, you kind of just have to say, it wasn't meant to be. There's really nothing you can do. You try to mend fences as much as you can. And hopefully, we had time to evaluate some of the guys on the depth chart now going forward, but they had their hands tied. There's not a whole lot you can do with this season, given that you're a one-dimensional football team now, and to expect them to be on every week is just, it's an impossible ask of any team.
Yeah. Maybe if we had Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, we might be able to do it, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Justin Sandu asks, is there any chance the Falcons go with Tavecchio, who signed a 2-year contract next year, to save some money? Is it true that he signed a 2-year contract, I think?
Well, I don't know. I included that tweet in my article today. For those that didn't see it, I kind of went through a list of guys that I think are reasonable cap casualties that the Falcons can cut ties with this offseason. And I did put Matt Bryant there. And in the article, I linked a tweet from, I believe, a Raiders beat writer. And he, reported that it was 2 years. But, all the contract websites like Spot Track and Over the Cap, they only have it at 1. But I'm sure it,
Over the Cap has it at 2 years. I just checked.
Oh, did they? All right.
I saw Spot Track earlier that they had it at 1. And
okay.
I was like,
they must have
I need
changed
to check
that recently then. So yeah, with all that in mind, I think, the point I made in the article was, keeping him on the roster like they have, even with Matt Bryant back healthy, and the fact that they thought enough to give him a 2-year deal meant that they were looking into the future, and they realized that Matt Bryant's 43, going to be 44 in May. And, Father Time caught up to him a little bit this season for the first time since, 2011 or when was the last time he was? Matt Bryant didn't miss many games since 2009, but I know he missed a few at one point at the end of the season. They brought in Shane Graham, but they probably realized that, hey, this could be his last hurrah, and they want to have a contingency plan in place, and they can save 2.8 some million next year by letting Matt go. So he'll always be a legend in our eyes. It's not a slight on him to say that Falcons should cut him. I just think if there's ways to trim the fat, I think that's one of them that I think is reasonable. I know Aaron's probably going to disagree, but yeah, I think it. Yeah, I know we've talked about this, but I do think it's possible that Tavecchio could be the starting kicker in 2019.
Well, to answer Justin's question, there's always a chance, because basically, when it comes to moves that will piss Aaron off, there's always a chance that the Falcons will do it, because I'm constantly in a perpetual state of being pissed off about decisions this team makes. So there's a chance. For me, at least, look, I think unless, as I said before, and we've discussed this a number of times, unless Matt Bryant decides that he wants to hang it up this year, I would not move on. Matt Bryant, again, Football Outsiders put up a thing a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2015, that he is the greatest clutch kicker of all time. And there has been absolutely no drop-off from whenever they wrote that article in 2015 to today in 2018. And look, Giorgio Tavecchio, awesome. He was great in Oakland for a season. He's been fine in Atlanta for 3 games. And, if the Falcons want to have, his number on speed dial for the event in 2020 or 2021, when Matt Bryant decides to hang it up, or when he does look like Father Time is catching up to him, but him missing a couple of games due to hamstring injury is not a sign of him slowing down. It's just, he got hurt like a lot of players do. But as far as I'm concerned, to me, like that saving $2.8 million to go from, again, arguably the greatest clutch kicker of all time to essentially a replacement level player, it's just not worth it to me. Just keep the guy that you know is old reliable, and until he shows he's not old reliable or doesn't want to do it anymore, then you just keep rolling with him. And if that means you spend $4 million on your kicking, so be it. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for, again, the greatest clutch kicker of all time. If that's not worth $4 million, then I don't know what is. So for me, at least, I think the whole, turning the keys to Giorgio.
So talk about why he's been on why they've kept him on the roster. You think then? Because obviously now we've had 2 games where we've seen Matt Bryant is pretty much back to being Matt Bryant. What are they doing then?
I don't know. Trying to piss me off, I guess. I don't know. Like, there's always a couple of moves that the Falcons make that I have no idea why they're doing it. But I don't know. Like, I don't know why he's still on the team.
Because I look.
They don't need the roster spot, but it's like,
no, I know, because I look at the LA Chargers and I see them going through kickers like musical chairs and struggling to find one, and I just, again, I know it's not a huge deal if he does get scooped up, and just like I said in the article, because I advocated cutting Matt Bosher and we got in a discussion about that, but you can find those specialists out there. It's almost like the whole running backs don't matter debate that's been a hotbed topic, online is you can find, running backs in the later rounds. You can find kickers and punters on the open market or the undrafted free agent market. So it's not something to lose sleep over if he does get waived and someone picks him up. But again, at any moment, I think with Matt Bryant's age, it could, the magic could be gone, and to have a succession plan in place is never a bad idea for such, a critical spot, because again, we've seen what Matt Bryant's done. You mentioned how he's the most clutch kicker of all time. I mean, he's won games for this football team. So to have a good one in place, and, Giorgio Tavecchio won the Falcons that Giants game. So again, that's kind of why I feel like there's a reason they've been looking at this guy for a while now, and it seems like they were right to scoop him up. So again, I love Matt Bryant. If they keep him for the remainder of his contract through 2020, that's great, because I mean, he's the best. But at some point, you got to think at 44 years old, the clock's ticking.
Look, I mean, they could be keeping Giorgio because they have an inkling of an idea that this might be the last year for Matt Bryant. But I'm just sitting there saying,
right?
Like, to me, like, I'm not cutting Matt Bryant. Like, it's just not going to happen.
I think he'll go on his own terms. I mean, if he wants to keep kicking, they're not going to say, "Nah, Matt, I think we're going to." I don't see that being the scenario. I think, like you said, maybe there's been conversations behind closed doors where it's like, yeah, this might be my last ride. Kind of like a Tony Gonzalez type of thing. I mean, Tony came back for that 1 year in 2013, hoping they'd make one last run at it, and it was a disappointing year. And who knows if it was a better year, maybe he would have played one more season, and maybe that has something to do with it this year. So you don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and maybe that's why they're keeping Giorgio around.
We'll have to see. Justin Sandu and Chris Clark asked similar questions. Justin's question is, what should the Falcons' top 3 offseason priorities be? And Chris Clark says, what would you consider the perfect offseason for the Falcons going into 2019?
So I think the first thing they got to do is get a pass rusher, to upgrade Vic Beasley. Vic Beasley was another one of those guys that I advocated being on the cuts that make the most sense. So swap out his salary, $12.81 million, and throw your hat into the ring for this big free agent defensive end class. There's some guys. I don't know if they're not going to be in the running for a guy like D Ford or Frank Clark, or I don't even think Dre Flowers. I think he's going to break the bank. Perhaps I think they're going to be more in the market for guys like Olivier Vernon, who I've talked about, and Brandon Graham, guys that are looking for their third contract but still have Olivier's 28. By all reports, he's going to be cut by the Giants as a cap casualty. Not really fit for their 3-4 defense. So he'd be a perfect fit. He's probably number one on my list. Going to be 28, 29, but I think he's a perfect fit in this defense. Opposite tack, and then he can slide inside in nickel situations and be a force there. So getting a guy like that is number one on my wish list. And then as far as some of the other things, they need another guard. I think. I don't believe Schweitzer. I don't think they feel Schweitzer is the long-term starter there, which is why they kind of went out and got Fusco. So I think they're going to keep Fusco for at least one more year. But then I think that left guard spot with Andy Ovitri being 33 and coming off a second triceps, I think they're going to try to get another guard or at least bring in some competition for Schweitzer, and maybe they'll bring back Garland. So whether it's the draft or there is some guards on the market that are enticing, Jamon Brown went to the Giants. I don't know, maybe they'll re-sign him and maybe he won't even be an option, but him, Mark Lewinsky is another name from the Colts, who's actually a former Seahawk. So, I mean, we know how the Falcons like former Seahawks. I mean, he's having a great year stabilizing that offensive line in Indianapolis, only 26, 27 years old. So he might be an option that's not necessarily just a Band-Aid, but a long-term starter there for 4 or 5 years. Maybe they'll throw some money at him. But I think getting they got to get younger at offensive line, and whether it's free agency with a guy like Lewinsky or the draft, they got to start adding some bodies there. And then, for me, that first round pick, which would be number 3 on my list as far as things that need to be accomplished. I mean, get one of these good defensive tackle prospects that are coming out. It's one of the better classes. You got to take advantage of it. So depending on where they're picking, if they're close enough, I'm in support of them making a trade up and trying to get Quinn Williams or Ed Oliver. Totally understand if they want to stay put, because again, this is a good class, and I think they can get someone that's maybe not as good as those guys, but a notch below that can be a 3-down player. A Jeffrey Simmons, a Raekwon Davis. Christian Wilkins is a guy I think is going to check off a lot of their boxes from Clemson. So get one of those guys. Those would be my 3 bullet points as far as things that I need to see them get done in the offseason.
I blacked out a little bit there when you mentioned the Falcons drafting a Clemson.
Yeah, I knew you wouldn't like that one, but at least it's a D tackle, not a Clemson DN, right?
Well, I mean, like the D tackles have like a hit rate of like 30%, while the DNs have a hit rate of like 5%. So
who have been the other D tackles from? Because I know they had defensive ends, Gaines Adams and
Grady Jarrett, DJ Reader.
DJ Reader's a hit, right?
Yeah, that's a hit.
Okay.
Jarvis Jenkins.
Jarvis Jenkins was at Clemson? I thought wasn't that Georgia?
No. He was Clemson.
Defensive tackle? Maybe I'm thinking of a different Jenkins.
John Jenkins is who you're thinking of.
Who?
John Jenkins. He was at Georgia.
Yeah, okay.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of the other ones, but they've had a couple of D tackles that are good and almost no DNs.
Now another question. I mean, was it all under Dabo? It wasn't Dabo Sweeney era Clemson, was it?
No, this goes back a good little ways.
So
before Dabo.
I know you're saying a lot of this in jest, but I do think we're probably getting a little too triggered on maybe Vic Beasley being a former Clemson guy and not working out, and that's having a lot to do with it here. But
Kevin Dodd, Shaq Lawson, all these superstar, Daquan Bowers, Gaines Adams. He died, so rest in peace, Gaines Adams.
Right.
Andre Branch.
Those are all DNs, right? So I'd be in support. I don't know if I would like the Dexter Lawrence pick. I think Austin Bryant is very similar to Kevin Dodd. I think he's not going to athletically. I don't think he's going to translate to the NFL. But as far as I'm even in favor of Clelin Ferrell, and I feel like that's probably why you gave me that look last week when I mentioned him. But
look, I haven't sat down and watched Clemson this year. I've got some games on my DVR that I need to watch before the season's up. But I watched all these guys in the summer, and I was just like I don't think any of these guys are top 50 talents. So maybe I'll sit down and watch and be like, oh, these guys are vastly improved. But I didn't. I thought Dexter Lawrence was the best of the bunch, and he was marginally a top 50 talent to me. And that's only because my thought was like, oh, he's basically where Danny Shelton should have been drafted, which is early in the second round, not in the first round.
Well, look, Christian Wilkins is going to infinitely make the goal line offense 1,000 times better. He's going to be what Poe was last year, although they're going to give him the rock, whereas Poe is the lead blocker. So, if Christian Wilkins is a Falcon, fans at home watching, it's a good pick. You're gonna enjoy it.
Okay. Well, they could have mitigated all that by just drafting Myles Jack, and we would have the number 1 rushing offense in the league. But anyway,
hey, I was jumping for Jack too, so yeah, I wanted that as well.
Answering Justin's question, my 3 offseason priorities: trenches.
Yeah,
no, but I think you gotta basically. I know this is a bad memory for folks, but you remember that 2014 offseason where the Falcons were all about toughening up? If they could do the same thing, but instead of getting run stoppers, get pass rushers, like that would be how I would want it to go. Like get that John Samoa type to solidify the offensive line, get the equivalent of a $50 million group of Tyson Jackson and Paul Soliai, but actually be good at rushing the quarterback instead of being okay at stopping the run. And then the equivalent of Rashid Hageman with the high upside pass rusher, not the high upside low floor run defender or whatever you think Rashid Hageman was, just not that better. So I think focusing on the offensive line, focusing on the defensive line are the priorities. If I was to say there was a third priority that isn't included in those things, I think adding another young pass catcher, preferably a wide receiver, but if it's a tight end, I'm not going to complain about that. Just somebody else that I think can help add a more dynamic element to the offense in addition to some of the pieces the Falcons have, because I do think they need to get, some more explosive guys that can sort of allow Sark to be a little bit more creative on offense and some, or at least some of the creative things that he likes to do that haven't quite worked, like putting Ridley in the backfield and whatnot, like get guys that can do that a little bit better than maybe some of our current personnel and whatnot. So,
yeah, I like this tight end class a lot. So I wouldn't mind them dipping into that. I think TJ Hawkinson's the guy to watch. Could be, 2019's version of George Kittle. So I was mad that they didn't get George Kittle in 2017, and maybe they'll get a second chance in 2019.
Yep. Love that Duke Riley pick.
Yeah, how about it?
Evan Birchfield's got a bunch of questions. First one is, even though it's pretty non-existent, what would have to happen for the Falcons to make the playoffs?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is they got to win out first, and then it's going to take some help. Again, looking at the schedules of some of the other teams, it's going to sound crazy, but the help that they can get, it's out there, and they've actually been getting the help. And I think we talked about it before. I mean, they've just been saying, no thanks to it. So if they get their act together and do go on a run and win out, some of the teams that they have to lose, like Seattle ahead of them, they got Minnesota still on the docket, and they got Kansas City on the docket. So that could be 2 losses right there. So that would put them at 9-7, I believe. So, that then you'd have a whole bunch of tiebreaker scenarios. You got Green Bay, you face Green Bay so that you control your own destiny there. Philadelphia's got, Los Angeles Rams still. They got Washington twice still. They got Houston. So they have a couple tough games still ahead. They're at 5-6. So that they can, get below that 9-7 mark. And then Carolina is probably the other one that they need to lose. And they've been doing a pretty good job of that lately. Losers of their last 3, Falcons play them. So again, they got the control of their own destiny in that matchup. So, it's doable. I think Minnesota's probably safely close to being in. And then obviously it looks like Chicago will be that other team in the North. So, really it comes down to the teams that I mentioned there. And then Washington, I guess, but because of that head-to-head tiebreaker with Washington, that should bode well in their favor. So, again, it's not impossible, but until we see some better performances from the Falcons, I mean, it really hinges on the Falcons and their efforts. If they, again, we've talked about it before, they have the potential. The schedule is not daunting, especially with the way Carolina's fallen off. I thought that game in Carolina would be tougher. It really comes down to, can they win this week and can they win next week? If they can, I think they can win out those last three.
Yeah. And what will happen is they'll win this week, they'll win next week, they'll win Arizona, and then they'll lose one of those last two games. And it'll.
Yeah, Falcon's going to Falcon.
Yeah, pretty much. So, yeah, look, Matt pretty much broke it down. They got to run the table, and they got to hope that several other teams refuse to get to 9-7 or better this season, which is possible, but probably slim given that you have basically 10 teams in the NFC with a shot to get there. And you basically need 3 of them not to. I mean, only 3 of them to do so. So basically, you need 7 teams to basically finish 8-8 or worse. Basically, from how I understand how the tiebreakers might go, but we'll see how it goes. But basically, if they don't win out, then there's no real shot. Evan's next question is thoughts on Thoughts on Jack Crawford's performance this year. Will he be on the team in 2019?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier when we were talking about the brother of the week. I think Jack's been great. I think he's been the best or second best defensive. Arguably, I would think second best defensive lineman, overall on the team behind Grady Jarrett. So I definitely think he's got a role on this team in 2019. The one thing I'll add is, talking about building a defensive line, Jack Crawford's been great, but you want a Jack Crawford to be your third or fourth best interior D lineman, not your second best D lineman total on the team. So that shows you where they're at from a talent standpoint, and they got to continue to beef that up if they want to be the type of team that they envision themselves to be. But yeah, Jack's been great. He's definitely earned that third year back, which wasn't a guarantee going in, but yeah, he's been great having a career year, and hopefully he just keeps it up going forward.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a career year. I think you're right in terms of saying that he's been arguably the second best D lineman on the team this season behind Grady Jarrett. Probably early in the season we would have definitely given that to Tack, but I think basically since he got hurt against the Steelers, Tack has basically been just pretty middling since then. So it's one of those things where, like, I don't think you can expect Jack Crawford to repeat this performance next year. I hope I'm wrong about that, just because it is a career year, and typically guys don't have career years at age 30 like Jack Crawford is, or at least typically when they have career years at age 30, they don't necessarily repeat that performance at age 31. So I think he definitely deserves to come back next year, but I do think the Falcons should plan accordingly with the idea that he is not going to be able to repeat what he is doing this year and add some players that will basically, mitigate that potentially. So, there's other people in the Jack Crawford fan club other than you, Evan. And I think he's definitely deserved all the praise that he's getting this year. But, me being Mr. Negativity, I don't know how much longer it's going to last beyond this year, but I think he definitely deserves an opportunity to prove me wrong next year.
And I think one more point about Jack Crawford, and this kind of connects with why Dan Quinn is a good coach and is worth keeping around, is, he saw a fit for Jack Crawford. Jack Crawford came from Dallas as a defensive end primarily, and Dan Quinn saw something in Jack that's like, yeah, I think you'd be great inside, going up against guards exclusively, and made that transition, and it's paying off. So Dan Quinn, like you said, I mean, he has plans for certain players and how to feature them, and I think that's another one of his great attributes as a coach. And a lot of Jack Crawford's career season needs to be heaped on Dan Quinn, because for other teams, Jack was playing defensive end and rushing against tackles and just wasn't as athletic enough to turn that corner and wreak havoc there. But on the interior, I mean, his first step and stuff, it's a perfect fit.
Yeah. Evan's next question is, more to blame for the run game, Coleman or the offensive line?
I think you got to go the offensive line. You know, I tweeted out earlier today about, because there was a stat that said Tevin Coleman leads the league in most carries that have resulted in a loss. And, you know, I made the point, I was kind of just making a joke that I've been talking about as far as Devontae Freeman, but I said, you know, Tevin Coleman gets you the yards that are blocked, but Devontae Freeman gets you the yards that aren't blocked. And, you know, I think we're seeing that. If the blocking's not there, Tevin's not going to have a lot of success. You know, he can't make something out of nothing, really. He's a guy that you want to get in space and him to use that speed. But with that said, I don't think the running game would be like demonstratively better. It would be improved. I think it's, you know, kind of like when we're talking about the defense with the injuries. If you got some of those guys back, it might be an average unit or a slightly below average unit. I think that's probably the same thing with the run game. I mean, the run game right now is like 30th in the league according to DVOA standards. If Devontae was there, maybe it would be in the low 20s, high teens. Because, you know, when we did see him, the limited amount that we saw him, and it was arguably two of the offensive line's worst performances against Philly and Pittsburgh, Devontae had a 50% success rate on his 15 touches. So he makes a big difference. And again, to answer the question, I don't think the offensive line or the run game issues should be heaped solely on Tevin Coleman. I think it's more so the offensive line. But if Devontae was there, I do think it would be a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree on that point about Devontae. Like, I don't think he magically gives us a top 10 running game this year. You know, maybe there's still probably bottom 10, but just closer to, like, say 21 or 22 or whatever it is than 32 at this point. But yeah, I think it is mostly the offensive line. I think the thing I've noticed watching the film of Tevin Coleman is I thought through the first 2 or 3 games, I thought all the areas that he was always questioned about and criticized about, with questions of his patience and his balance and his vision, I thought those were non-issues throughout the preseason in those first couple of games. And I think those issues have sort of reared their ugly head over the last month or two since then. And I think probably a lot of that is owed to him not having the patience due to the offensive line's blocking and not having sort of the willingness to sort of wait for things to develop, because he no longer has the trust that it will develop, given how the offensive line has performed. But to the offensive line's credit, I would say probably 4 out of their 5 best games have come in the last 5 weeks, at least as far as run blocking goes. They've been competent for the most part, at least when you're measuring from a success rate standpoint, the Saints game being a very notable exception to that. But against Washington, against in the second half against the Giants, against Cleveland, and against Dallas, they were somewhat effective running the football. And then, you know, the other game they had was the Carolina game. So I feel like, you know, even though we're coming off probably the offensive line's worst performance, I don't feel like, at least as far as the running game goes, like that is the performance that we've seen consistently over the last month. So I feel like that is more an aberration, or I hope it's more of an aberration than what we, should expect the rest of the season. So I think if they play like they played the 3 or 4 previous games prior to that Saints game for the next 4 or 5 games, then I think this offense, this running game, I don't know how much it's going to improve in the rankings, but it won't be just downright terrible and abysmal moving forward.
Right.
But
and those are my feelings in general on the offensive line is, we're talking about the protection breaking down and stuff, and how many guys do we need to upgrade? You mentioned the performance that they have had. They've had pretty good outings, but then they've had other ones where they're not so great. And, I do think a lot of those are aberrations. And I think we can attribute, a lot of the volatility to the fact that we do have two backup guards in Garland and Schweitzer. And I think that's kind of the reason and the thought process behind the Fusco addition was, Fusco's not a world beater or anything like that, but I think the consistency that he brought in his game was what intrigued the Falcons by him. They knew what they can expect, whereas Garland's been good at times this year, really good, in fact, but then he just throws up one of the worst performances of his career against the Saints. And so that inconsistency, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you do have two backups in there. You don't have necessarily guys that have loads and loads of starter experience. And that's kind of what you're missing when you don't have Levitri and Fusco is that consistency. And you might not get the great performances, but you're not going to get the aberrations that we've gotten, like against the Saints and, against, I guess the Steelers. So for me, that's why it's key to get, that's why I think it's valuable to bring Fusco back, just to have that one consistent starter that you're going to get there. And then hopefully you can address it with a starting caliber guard, whether it's in free agency or the draft.
Well, look, I think Fusco was pretty terrible when he was playing. So I don't feel like, I feel like Garland, outside of the Saints game has been an upgrade over Fusco. So as far as bringing Fusco back, like I'm not going to be against it, but at the same time, when people say like the injuries to the guards have been a big reason, I don't really think so. Like Levitri, we got like a game and a half from him, but he wasn't good in the first game and a half. Fusco was pretty awful for the first 6.5 games that he was playing this season. So I don't feel like the injuries on the offensive line have really been like the only injury on the offensive line that to me has been an issue. I think is the injury to Ryan Schrader, which, the undisclosed secret, backdoor injury that I think he's dealing with because his balance and his technique has been pretty awful this year. And I think that's not him being a year older. That's just him not being able to put the weight on, a certain part of his body that he used to be able to put on because he's dealing with an injury. So like, as far as I'm concerned, the injuries to the guard to me is mostly a non-issue this year. I think if there is an issue on the offensive line, it's some phantom secret injury to Ryan Schrader.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would agree. Ben Garland wrecked that game for Atlanta. I mean, he was the focal point of the issue in that New Orleans game. I don't know if you can put a game. I mean, you can, like you said, you can put more of the games on Schrader and stuff. But as far as Fusco being the sole culprit of the offensive line being bad in other games, I mean, you can honestly
I wouldn't
say that?
I wouldn't say that, but I could make a very compelling case that he was the worst starting offensive lineman for the Falcons in the first 6 games.
Even over Schweitzer and I mean,
I think you can make that case. Like, you would have to like I would have to really like dig in to make a distinction. But I think the fact that I don't think there's much of a difference between what Schrader did in the first 6 weeks, and he had some awful performances, and what Fusco did in the first 6 weeks, and whatever you think of what Schweitzer did in the first 6 weeks, I don't think there's that much of a difference between what Fusco did. So like, I don't think the guards play has been an issue. I think the guard play has been markedly improved over the last month than it was in the first month of the season.
Until this past week, I mean, like I said, Garland's been great. That's why, and that's why I don't think they're going to make any changes, honestly, to the offensive line for one bad performance. But I will say, if they struggle in that first half, then they might have a short leash on them. But that was the shocking part of that game because Garland had been really good. To see that, I mean, he got, but again, Sheldon Rankins has been great this year. So, I mean, maybe it's just the fact that he's going up against a Pro Bowl caliber D tackle too. So,
that was
something to monitor moving forward. Yeah.
There was a question for the Saints going into the season. Would Sheldon Rankins emerge as that number 2 guy to Cameron Jordan? And he has.
Yeah.
And he showed in both Falcon games, certainly.
Yeah, I'll have to go back. I'm curious now myself. I'll go back and look at some of the Fusco that I can find and see, because
don't look at the last series against the Eagles. You'll throw up.
Well, yeah, I think I already had that in the back of my head. Thanks for reminding me of that. But
yeah. Evan's next question is: I know people laugh at the Pro Bowl, but if you had to choose 5 players from this team to vote for, who would it be?
So Matt Ryan, number 1. Well, probably Julio, number 1. Matt Ryan, number 2. I think Jake Matthews deserves it, but usually how it works is you kind of make it a year after you might deserve it. And there is quite a bit of tackles too, so it's not like there's no competition there. But I'd give him a vote. I think he's been the most consistent offensive lineman. I think Mac will probably get it for name recognition, but he hasn't been his usual Pro Bowl self. But I still think he's played well enough to deserve a vote there. As far as the defense, I mean, Grady Jarrett, again, I'd vote for him, but there's a whole mess of people at that spot as well, so it's going to be tough, but I don't think there's anybody else worthy on defense. I mean, you could say DeMonte Casey because of the interceptions, but, I don't think he's going to get that credit. So, yeah, I'd leave it at those 5. I mean, if I had to choose 5.
Yeah, if you're forcing me to choose 5,
yeah.
I'm probably going Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. Let's go Jake Matthews. Let's go Matt Bryant, and then let's go Grady Jarrett. I feel like those are the 5 guys that have been pretty good on this team relative to their peers. If I was forced to, I guess DeMonte Casey would be number 6 on the list, if only for the interceptions. I don't think he's played at a Pro Bowl level,
right.
But you get those numbers, people tend to vote for it.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, so I'm not going to be mad at if he gets voted to the Pro Bowl. I'm not going to be mad. Just like I wasn't mad at Vic Beasley for getting voted to the Pro Bowl in 2016, even though I didn't think he deserved it then. But if you get it, enjoy Hawaii, my friends. So, I'm not going to complain about it.
I mean, the one, while we're on the topic, I mean, the one that I am going to be disappointed about, and, I don't care about the Pro Bowl too much, but when it comes to Matt Ryan and kind of what that'll mean for Hall of Fame candidacy, I think it is somewhat important. Now, maybe the voters are starting to get away from that, and I don't know. I think they're still pretty old school in their ways. But, the research I've done, and I wrote an article on it, that it seems to be that 5 Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro distinction is what all of the Hall of Fame quarterbacks have in common, and those are even ones that don't have a Super Bowl ring. So, I think a season like Matt's having, despite the Falcons' poor record, I think he's very deserving. Obviously, Drew Brees is a lock, in the NFC, and I think Jared Goff is probably going to get, he's having a great season, so he's near lock because they're 10-1 as well, the Rams. But some of the other names, that he's going to be competing with, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, they've had good years. But again, I'm biased, but I think if you look at what the Seahawks are asking Russell Wilson to do, they've kind of pulled back on him and kind of changed their philosophy to what it was early in his career, as far as not having him throw the ball that many times, and they're leaning on that rushing game. And then Cam Newton, I think he's very popular and he's going to get a lot of votes, but again, especially with their losing streak playing into it, I think, I don't know about you, but I just think Matt still should get it based on his numbers. I think he's playing like a top 5 quarterback. He has all the way since week 2. So, yeah, I just needed to get that off my chest.
No, I get it, man. I think the good thing, I think you're right. I think, Goff and Brees definitely should get it. Brees is probably going to win the MVP unless he gets hurt. I think, that 3rd spot will come down to either Matt Ryan, probably Wilson, and then maybe Aaron Rodgers, because, Aaron Rodgers is always going to win popularity contest.
Yeah, that's another one that would frustrate me.
But I think the good thing is that even if Matt Ryan finishes 4th in that voting, which I feel reasonably confident that he won't finish, below that. Assuming that either the Rams or the Saints are in the Super Bowl, then they'll get exempted, and he'll get bumped into the game. So I feel reasonably confident that even if he doesn't make the initial three, that he'll still get the play. But I think you're 100% right. As far as the three best quarterbacks in the NFC, there's no doubt about it that it has been Goff, Breeze, and Matt Ryan. And I think Wilson and Newton and Rodgers and those guys have had solid seasons. Nothing, but it's when you really look at it, it's not really comparable to what Matt Ryan has done this season. And that's coming from me, the person who.
Yeah,
I'm not a Ryan hater, but I'm just not like a person that goes out of my way to heap effusive praise on him. I feel reasonably confident that he.
Kirk Cousins is the other one too that I am a little bit worried about. We didn't mention. He's had some up and down games, but again, if they continue to win, it seems to be that they always gravitate towards those guys. But yeah, there's no question he's been the top 3 NFC quarterback all season consistently. But you did bring a great segue talking about New Orleans and LA potentially being in the Super Bowl, and then that would give Matt a spot in the Pro Bowl. So I'll let you go first. Who do you think is the Super Bowl matchup right now?
Well, preseason, I think I had Patriots-Vikings. I don't feel as good about that one anymore.
Hot take maybe, but I feel more comfortable about the Vikings in that matchup than I do about the Patriots. I don't know if you agree with that.
Saying. Like, yeah, I'm kind of like,
right?
I'm like,
and who would have thought we'd be saying that? But
yeah, like the Patriots, like all season, for most of the season, I've been like, yeah, the Patriots, they'll figure it out in January or whatnot. But I don't feel
not
as
really.
confident.
They've kind of just plodded along this year, kind of not looking too impressive.
Yeah. So, look, the homers me I'm not gonna pick the Saints. So, I'm gonna pick the Rams from the NFC. I'm trying to think, who do I think will make it from the AFC? I don't want to pick the Chiefs. I don't want to pick the Steelers. I don't want to pick the Patriots.
Everyone wants to see that rematch, though. That would be great if it was Rams Chiefs again. I mean, that was probably the best game I've watched all year.
Do I have to pick Houston? Is that who I'm going to wind up having to pick?
Right now, they're the 2 seed, aren't they? That's crazy.
I think so.
We're talking about 2 of the quarterbacks that teams traded up for in that 2017 draft are the top 2 seeds. I mean, those franchises are looking like geniuses right now.
Did Joey Bosa come back?
Yeah, I think he had a sack last week too.
Okay.
That honestly is my team at the beginning of the year.
I'm going to go with the Chargers. Yeah, I'm going to go with the Chargers just to be different.
I like that pick. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to be the bad guy in the show right now because I do think it's the Saints year, and we talk and joke about Falcons going to Falcon and having the Saints play a Super Bowl in the Falcons home stadium. I mean, isn't that what it's like being a Falcons fan, right? I mean, that in a sentence, that's basically what it is. So, I would say the dark horse, though, we touched on it. I think Minnesota is starting to get, into a groove a little bit, where I think they can, if the guys are coming back healthy, Everson Griffin coming back, Anthony Barr came back last week, Dalvin Cook was back. So my one dark horse in the NFC to maybe shock people would be the Minnesota Vikings and maybe getting some revenge for last year, kind of throwing an egg in that NFC title game.
I think Chicago is a team that shouldn't be slept on either.
They're sneaky, but I don't know if I can trust Trubisky I think it's like the LA Rams last year. I don't think we can trust him in his first playoff performance people shouldn't have trusted Goff really in that first playoff performance.
Well, the thing I will say for Trubisky is typically you're right. The quarterbacks in their first playoff game are typically not good. But the exceptions are guys that play with exceptionally good defenses. And I think the Bears have the defense that if they have to win a game, 20-17, they can win those games. So as far as them making it all the way to the Super Bowl, particularly, if they're like the 4 seed or the 3 seed or whatever, I'm a little skeptical there, but I think the NFC race could be interesting.
Right, and I might change my opinion too because LA plays Chicago in 2 weeks. So, depending on how they look in that game, that game's in Chicago. So, you might have to put a disclaimer on that one for that reason. I'm curious how LA would travel in the cold there, but yeah, they definitely have a championship level defense, but will Trubisky make enough plays? Because the quarterback has to make a couple, and Nagy's been great with him, putting him in great positions. So maybe he'll do more of the same. So yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but I just until I see him do it, it's just like kind of Bortles a little bit last year. Like, I don't think any of us could have envisioned Jacksonville being in that Super Bowl until we actually saw it happen, and it didn't happen. So we'll see. I think, my prediction would be New Orleans, but Minnesota is more my dark horse. And then in the AFC, I mean, you went the Chargers. The Chargers was my pick. I wanted them in the beginning of the year. I think Phillip Rivers deserves to play in one. I like their personnel a lot. The Melvin Gordon injury recently with an ankle, that's something to watch out for with them. Chargers are kind of like the Falcons in the AFC where they just do some dumb stuff at times and cost them playoff opportunities or games. So, we'll see about that. But I'll pick the Chiefs. I think, especially if they get that home field advantage, I know it didn't do them a lot of good last year against the Titans, but Mahomes and that offense is clicking on an unreal level, right up there with the Saints. So if we saw a Saints versus Chiefs Super Bowl, obviously we know who everyone's going to be pulling for, but that would be quite the show for sure. I mean, over 100 combined points, perhaps, just like that Monday night game against the Rams. So I'll go with that, but we know how the NFL works. It usually doesn't go how you predict it. So it should be fun to watch towards the end, but that's what I'll go with. Chiefs, Saints. Yeah.
Okay.
I hope not. God, I hope not. But hey,
look, I'll be honest.
If Drew Brees wins the MVP, though, we've seen the trend of MVP winning quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. So, they can get their comeuppance then and lose while, the whole city of Atlanta laughs at them. I mean, that could be good if that happens, but we have to sit through 3 hours of, nail biting before we would get to, I guess, celebrate that joy. But something to consider.
I mean, look, I'm on the Bears only because I need to add more teams to the pot that could possibly beat the Saints. I have to convince myself that they're not going to win that game. So
that's fair. I mean, I think there's a lot of teams. You talk about Minnesota's defense, Chicago's defense. The Rams can go tick for tack with them. So there's teams that I think can knock them off. So it's not like they're just it's gonna be a cakewalk. I think it's gonna be a lot tougher to get to the Super Bowl this year than when they did in 2009. So we'll see what happens.
That we will. So, all right, that is it, guys, for our show tonight. Appreciate you tuning in for another long one. As often is the case, Matt and I get into these debates about various subjects, and we take a question that should have lasted 5 minutes, and we take it, 25 minutes. So we appreciate you guys, and thank you for asking all your great questions that lead to such debates. If you want to get your questions answered on a future episode, then you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag on Twitter. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle, Falcons PFC. I am at Falc Fans. Matt is at Matt Karoly, MattKaroly. But you can also check us out at ProFootballCentral.com, and you can find the links to the iTunes and podcast feed there or at the show's Twitter page pinned at the top. Make sure you subscribe to Pro Football Central YouTube channel. Give us a subscription and hit that bell icon so you know when we go live, as well as make sure you like us on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio there. Matt, I know you got some Rise Up Reader stuff. You plugged one of the things, but let the people know what your upcoming project is going to consist of.
Yeah, so today I debuted part 1 of a 3-part series, looking into the future. Part 1 was talking about who are potential cuts that the Falcons could make in 2019 and kind of where that would put them salary cap wise. So that's up at riseupreader.com. Part 2, then I'll look into some free agents, both the Falcons' upcoming free agents and also free agents from around their league that might fill some needs. So that'll be up sometime in December. And then part 3, will come after the College Bowl season, and we'll talk about who the Falcons can potentially draft in the April 2019 draft, and kind of a little bit scouting reports on some of those guys. So touch on some various positions like D-line, offensive line, tight end. So that'll be up in January to conclude that 3-part series. So you can check that out at riseupreader.com.
Yeah, have it, guys. We'll see you next week.